Hello everyone, my name is Emrys Matharia Watson, and today we will be looking at environmental displacement as a humanitarian crisis. For a quick overview, climate change is one of the biggest contributors to internal displacement and migration. An analysis by the World Bank found that unless action is urgently taken, there could be more than 143 million internal climate migrants by the year 2050. In just 3 regions alone: Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and Latin America. Displacement around the world has become a massive humanitarian crisis. These environmental migrants are not receiving enough support from national, regional, and global communities and leadership. Let's take a look at one recent example of migration caused by the ripple effects of climate change: the crisis in Cameroon. Drought in the region of Cameroon bordering the country of Chad has led to water scarcity and land degradation, affecting local fishermen, farmers, and herders. Attempts by these groups to adapt to the water shortage have sparked violent conflict between the herders and the fishermen and farmers. So not only are these people suffering from water scarcity, but they are also dealing with the food scarcity and violence that are directly caused by climate change. Approximately 11,000 Cameroonians migrated across the border to Chad over the course of 3 weeks in August and September of this year. Plus, there are about 12,500 people who didn't cross the border and are internally displaced in Cameroon. According to the UNHCR, which is the UN Refugee Agency, it and its partners have distributed basic necessities, set up community kitchens to serve hot meals, and erected 4 communal shelters. But the need for more food, water, and shelter remains urgent, with many refugees still sleeping under trees amidst frequent downpours. The UNHCR has set up mobile clinics and distributed medication and mosquito nets, but the heavy rains have made the roads leading to the isolated villages where refugees are sheltering almost impassable. So, what are some of the environmental causes of internal displacement and migration around the world? There are 2 subsets or categories into which the environmental effects of climate change fall: rapid onset and slow onset. Rapid onset environmental effects of climate change are the ones we tend to hear about more frequently, as they tend to cause major damage over a very short amount of time. For example, it is easy to recognize that hurricanes have become much stronger and more dangerous over recent years. Hurricane Michael in 2018 caused massive amounts of damage across Central America and the southeast of the United States. Floods are another type of rapid onset environmental disaster. This year has seen major floods in areas that have historically not been all that vulnerable to flooding: New York City and several areas in Western Europe, affecting Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, and even the UK. Another type of rapid onset environmental disaster is the wildfire. Recent years have seen truly devastating wildfires in Greece, Turkey, Australia, Brazil, and the United States. This summer, the wildfires in Siberia, like the ones pictured here, grew larger than all the other wildfires in the world at the time combined, at more than 40 million acres of land. The other category of environmental effects of climate change is known as slow onset. These are effects that take much longer to develop and are measured over the course of years or decades rather than the hours or days of the rapid onset effects. Deforestation is one of these slow onset effects. These images from 2000 and 2012 show the advance of deforestation in one part of the Amazon rainforest in Brazil. Deforestation can lead to land degradation and erosion over time, as well as have massive impacts on wildlife of the area, which can change the availability of certain sources of food. Other slow onset effects of climate change include desertification and drought, which can lead to food scarcity, as Central America is experiencing now. This graphic to the left depicts the dry corridor of Central America, which consists of rocky and parched soil that carries little nutrients for good crop yield. Rising sea levels threaten the very existence of small island developing states, or SIDS, in the Pacific and encroach upon low-lying coasts. According to this graph on the right from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, sea levels have risen over 9 inches since the 1880s. Both desertification and rising sea levels create competition for resources, food and space respectively. This competition leads to migration in search of more resources, or it leads to conflict, which only serves to exacerbate these humanitarian issues. So what is the role of the United Nations in this global crisis? Migration caused by climate change is very often a way of seeking out resources that are no longer available in one's homeland. Resources that migrants seek tend to be things like food, water, shelter, and medicine, among others. These are things that the effects of climate change have taken from them. The United Nations works to provide these resources to migrants as a short-term solution to prevent the loss of resources in vulnerable areas and to reestablish the availability of resources to allow migrants to return to their homes in the long term. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees is a UN entity which assists and protects refugees who fled violence, persecution, war, or disaster at home. Their engagement on the climate emergency has 3 main focuses: helping the international community develop better protection policy for refugees and displaced peoples, reducing environmental degradation and enhancing preparedness for the effects of climate change, and reducing the UNHCR's environmental footprint. The International Organization for Migration is a UN-related organization which oversees, supports, and coordinates the development of policy guidance concerning migration, environment, and climate change through the MECC division. The IOM's goals are to prevent forced migration as much as possible, to assist and protect those who are forced to migrate, and to facilitate migration in the context of climate change adaptation. The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs is part of the UN Secretariat and works to ensure crisis-affected people, including internally displaced people, receive the assistance and protection they need. The Global Compact for Migration is the first intergovernmentally negotiated agreement to cover all dimensions of international migration in a holistic and comprehensive manner. Text for this agreement was finalized in 2018 and will be adopted at an intergovernmental conference in Morocco this December. The GCM includes 23 objectives for managing migration at local, national, regional, and global levels. The UN Framework Convention on Climate Change is a treaty establishing a UN entity known as UN Climate Change. It is the parent treaty of the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement, which strives to keep the global average temperature rise at or below 1.5 degrees Celsius. This is expected to reverse or at least lessen the impact of major environmental changes that lead to displacement and migration. So these are people who are either forced to leave or choose to leave their homes because of external threats to their lives and livelihoods. So these climate refugees are refugees, right? Well, no, not really. It's not that simple, unfortunately. The 1951 Refugee Convention, held in response to the millions of people displaced in the aftermath of World War II, defined a refugee as any person who crosses an international border due to fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership of a particular social group. This means that the term climate refugee has no legal basis in international law. There is agreement among much of the international community that the term should be avoided because the plight of these migrants doesn't meet these criteria. The UNHCR has not endorsed the term climate refugees. They say the more appropriate term would be persons displaced in the context of disasters and climate change. Another alternative term offered by the IOM is environmental migrants, which they define as persons or groups of persons who, predominantly for reasons of sudden or progressive change in the environment that adversely affects their lives or living conditions, are obliged to leave their habitual homes or choose to do so, either temporarily or permanently, and who move either within their country or abroad. There has been no official international consensus on the most appropriate term for those who are displaced due to climate change. In addition to the lack of internationally agreed upon labels and well-defined legal rights of environmental migrants, there are wider difficulties surrounding the response to their plight. The first of these is that their home nations and/or host nations most likely are not prioritizing their displacement as a crisis that needs to be addressed with urgency. According to a recent report by the UN Secretary-General High-Level Panel on Internal Displacement, states have varying levels of political will and capacity to address internal displacement. In some cases, governments are committed to taking action but lack the technical or financial capacity to do so. In others, capacities are present, but displacement is not seen as a priority. In extreme cases, states are both unable and unwilling to respond, or are even responsible for causing displacement in the first place. Across all contexts, there is limited accountability for inaction or failures. Secondly, entities within the UN system, including the ones previously mentioned in this presentation, are not working in tandem with other entities to support long-term solutions. Again, quoting the high-level panel on internal displacement, development, peace, disaster risk reduction, and climate change adaptation actors are not predictably engaged in responses to internal displacement, and their country teams do not always appear to see themselves as having a responsibility for supporting solutions, thereby placing the burden for change entirely on the humanitarian system and further entrenching a short-term humanitarian approach. Lastly, there are insufficient funds for addressing displacement and environmental damage, which exacerbates poor conditions. Finally, from the same panel, there is a gap in predictable financing for solutions. There is an over-reliance on short-term humanitarian grants, which, in most cases, states are unable to access, do not allow for more holistic, long-term action required for solutions, and do not promote a joined-up approach across the humanitarian, development, peace nexus. So, what do you think? What term should we use to refer to people who are displaced from their homes due to the effects of climate change? How could the international community better support those who are forced or choose to leave their homes because of the effects of climate change? I look forward to hearing your thoughts on this in the discussion forum this week. Thank you for watching, and I hope you all have a great week.